I've always considered myself a rational man. I've never been one for theatrics or drawn-out drama. My life, up until 2 weeks ago, was nothing short of normal. Hell, I'd even say it was good. If you'd asked me, I'd have told you that I was living the dream. I had a successful career, a decent house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and most importantly, a wife, Sarah. She was my rock, at least, that's what I thought. We had been married for 3 years, a time filled with what I believed was love, respect, and an unbreakable bond. But here I am now, staring into the black abyss of betrayal. I never saw it coming. Maybe I was blind, or perhaps I just didn't want to see it. But I've learned that sometimes, the ones closest to you are the ones capable of the darkest treacheries. As I write this, I'm 2 weeks out from discovering what I can only describe as my worst nightmare. A nightmare that unfolded right under my nose while I was sleeping. It all began with a seemingly normal day. I was sitting in my office at Kingsley Logistics, managing the usual slew of reports and meetings. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, like always. "Hope your day is going well, babe. Can't wait to see you tonight." That was Sarah. Sweet, caring, and consistent. I smiled and texted her back, a quick "love you" before getting back to the grind. I always appreciated that we kept things like this between us, small reminders of our connection throughout the day. It made me feel secure, grounded. I wasn't the guy who suspected anything. I had zero reason to. Sarah was always the supportive wife, doting, never absent from home for suspicious reasons. Our intimacy wasn't lacking, and our marriage didn't have any obvious cracks. Sure, we had our share of disagreements, but nothing that made me think we were heading toward the abyss. But that's the thing about trust. It's the quiet moments, the seemingly perfect days that mask the crumbling foundation beneath your feet. You don't even realize you're standing on a collapsing building until you're in freefall. I'd been pulling long hours at work recently, working hard for a promotion. Sarah seemed fine with it, encouraging, even. She said she understood the pressure I was under. She'd always joke about how she couldn't wait for me to get that raise so we could finally plan that trip to Italy we had always dreamed of. I guess that's why I didn't think twice about her sudden interest in hosting some of my coworkers at our house. Now, here's where it gets strange. Sarah never really cared for my colleagues. She always referred to them as a rowdy bunch, too vulgar for her tastes. And she wasn't wrong. Many of them were loud, obnoxious, and had a reputation for being, let's say, morally flexible. But when Sarah suggested throwing a small get-together at our place to help me relax after a stressful month, I figured she was just trying to make me happy. Why not invite a few of the guys over? She suggested one evening as we sat down for dinner. I know you've been working like a dog. Maybe some beers and barbecue with your coworkers would help you unwind. I smiled. That's sweet of you. Are you sure you're okay with that? I know you're not their biggest fan. Sarah gave me that radiant smile of hers, the one that made me fall in love with her. Of course, I'm okay with it. You deserve a break, Adam. Let me take care of everything. And so, that's how it started, the subtle shift in my reality. The evening of the party arrived, and everything seemed perfect. Sarah had gone all out. She cooked an impressive spread, stocked the fridge with beers, and even cleaned the house from top to bottom. I could tell she wanted everything to be just right, and honestly, I felt lucky. Not every guy had a wife who would go to such lengths for their happiness. My co-workers arrived, 6 of them in total: Matt, Greg, Jackson, Kyle, Chris, and Jeff. All decent guys by work standards, though they had their flaws. Greg, in particular, had a bit of a wandering eye, especially when it came to women. And Jeff, well, Jeff was known for his inappropriate jokes, the kind that could make anyone uncomfortable if they didn't have thick skin. The party started off great. We stood around the grill, beers in hand, talking shop and cracking jokes. Sarah floated around, making sure everyone had what they needed, and I couldn't help but feel proud. I had the life other guys envied: a successful career, a beautiful wife, a comfortable home. As the night wore on, the beer started flowing a little too freely, and I could feel the exhaustion from my long week creeping up on me. I remember Sarah giving me a soft nudge as I sat in one of the patio chairs. "Why don't you go lie down for a bit?" she whispered, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You look tired." I yawned, realizing she was right. "Yeah, maybe I'll take a quick nap. You sure you've got everything handled?" She nodded. "Of course, babe. I'll keep the guys entertained. You rest." With that, I stumbled off to our bedroom. The sounds of laughter and conversation filled the house, but in my tired state, I barely registered it. I lay down, fully dressed, intending only to close my eyes for a moment. but sleep came fast, and I drifted off into the dark. I don't know how long I slept. All I know is that when I woke up, the house was eerily silent. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, the type you feel in your bones when something's wrong. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand, 2:30 a.m. The party should have been long over by now. I stretched and got out of bed, feeling groggy. The sound of faint whispers and giggles drifted down the hallway, drawing me out of the bedroom. My mind was foggy, still half asleep, but I followed the sounds, curious as to why anyone was still up at this hour. As I approached the living room, the whispers grew louder, and that's when I heard it, Sarah's voice. But something was off. There was a tone in her voice I didn't recognize, something sultry, almost teasing. I paused just before the door, peeking around the corner, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There she was, my wife, Sarah, bent over the coffee table, her dress hitched up around her waist. One of my co-workers, Greg, was behind her, grinning like a predator. He was holding her hips, thrusting into her like she was some kind of plaything, while the others sat around, watching, and worse, laughing. My heart pounded in my chest, the world spinning around me. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of sick dream. I wanted to scream, to shout, but my voice caught in my throat. My body felt paralyzed, as if I were nothing more than a bystander in my own life. Greg groaned loudly, and that's when I saw the others stand up. Jeff and Chris, two of the most vulgar men I knew, stepped forward next, practically shoving Greg aside. They exchanged some crude remarks, laughing at how eager Sarah was, at how I had been sleeping soundly just a few doors down. In that moment, my world shattered. Every illusion I had about my life, about my marriage, was obliterated in the span of a few seconds. My legs felt weak, my stomach churned, and a wave of nausea hit me like a freight train. I stumbled back, almost tripping over myself as I retreated down the hallway. The laughter, the sounds of Sarah's moans, echoed behind me, growing louder as I fled. I couldn't bear to look anymore, couldn't stand the sight of the woman I loved being defiled by the men I had considered friends. I locked myself in the bathroom, gripping the sink as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror, but I barely recognized the man I saw. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, filled with an overwhelming sense of disbelief and betrayal. How could this be happening? How could the woman I loved, the woman I married, do this? The bile rose in my throat, and I vomited into the toilet, my entire body shaking with rage and despair. I couldn't think straight, couldn't process the whirlwind of emotions tearing me apart from the inside. I had to leave. I had to get out of there before I did something I would regret. I must have sat in that bathroom 4 hours, my mind a chaotic swirl of anger, disgust, and confusion. Every fiber of my being told me to storm out there, to rip those guys away from Sarah and make them pay for what they were doing. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stayed, locked in my own world of torment, trying to wrap my head around the nightmare that had become my life. How long had this been going on? Was this the first time, or had Sarah been screwing my co-workers behind my back 4 months? Years? Questions flooded my mind, each more painful than the last. But one thing became crystal clear: nothing in my life had been what I thought it was. I wasn't the successful, happy man with a loving wife and a secure future. I was a joke, a walking, breathing punchline, the husband who worked long hours to provide for his wife while she bent over 4 other men in the next room. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. I dry heaved into the toilet, gripping the cold porcelain as though it was the only thing anchoring me to reality. When I finally gathered the strength to stand, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. I washed my face and splashed some cold water on my skin, trying to shake the daze that clung to me like a heavy fog. I stared into the mirror, looking for some kind of explanation in my reflection, but there was none. Just the empty shell of a man who had lost everything in one night. I opened the door, stepping cautiously down the hallway, my ears tuned to any sound. Nothing. It was like the house itself had conspired with them to erase the horror that had taken place just hours earlier. But I knew. I could still hear their sick laughter in my head, could still see the image of Sarah bent over the table, her body used like a toy. I reached the living room, and there she was, Sarah, sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking for all the world like nothing had happened. The beer bottles were gone. The plates were cleaned. The house was spotless. For a split second, I thought maybe it had all been some horrible dream. Maybe I had imagined the entire thing in a state of exhaustion. But then Sarah turned to look at me, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow, and I knew. This wasn't a dream. This was real. "Hey," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hey?" That's what she had to say after what I had seen? After what she had done? The rage that had been simmering in my gut flared up, threatening to explode. But I forced myself to stay calm. I needed answers. I needed to understand how my life had unraveled so completely, so suddenly. "I woke up," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Sarah blinked, her expression flickering with confusion, or maybe guilt. It was hard to tell. "What do you mean?" "I woke up during the party," I repeated, my eyes never leaving hers. "I saw everything, Sarah. I saw you." Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. For a long, agonizing moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the weight of what had happened hanging heavy in the air. And then, she broke. "I'm sorry, Adam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I repeated, incredulous. "Sorry, that's all you have to say?" I watched my own wife, with my co-workers, in our home, while I was sleeping. "And all you can say is sorry?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, as if trying to make sense of her own actions. "I didn't mean for it to happen, it just—" "Don't you dare say it just happened," I cut her off, my voice trembling with barely restrained fury. "Don't you dare try to make this seem like some kind of accident, Sarah. You chose this. You let them touch you. You wanted them to touch you." She started to sob, burying her face in her hands, but her tears did nothing to soften the knot of rage in my chest. In fact, they only made it worse. How dare she cry? How dare she act like she was the victim here, when it was me, who had been betrayed? "How long?" I asked, my voice cold and detached. Sarah looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. "What? How long has this been going on?" I repeated, my eyes narrowing. "Was tonight the first time, or have you been screwing them behind my back 4 months? Years?" She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I got my answer. It's not what you think," she stammered. "It wasn't like that." "How long, Sarah?" I roared, slamming my fist into the wall so hard that the picture frames rattled. She jumped, her breath hitching in her throat as more tears spilled down her cheeks. "A few months," she whispered. "It started a few months ago. But it didn't mean anything, Adam. I swear, it didn't mean anything. A few months." The words hit me like a freight train. 4 months, she had been betraying me. 4 months, she had been lying to my face, acting like the perfect wife while she let other men use her body. My co-workers, my friends. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The woman I had loved, the woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with, had been sneaking around behind my back, screwing men who I had shared drinks with, laughed with, trusted. And the worst part? It wasn't even the fact that she had cheated. It was that she had done it so casually, like it was no big deal. Like our marriage, our life together, meant nothing to her. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How could you betray me like this?" Sarah shook her head, sobbing harder. I don't know, Adam. I didn't mean for it to get this far. It just happened." "That's bullshit, and you know it," I spat, pacing back and forth, trying to keep my emotions in check. "This wasn't some random mistake, Sarah. This was a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to sleep with them. In our house, while I was sleeping." Her sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands again. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was truly sorry, that this was just some horrible lapse in judgment, but I couldn't. The damage had been done. The trust had been shattered, and no amount of apologies or tears was going to fix it. "What about them?" I asked, my voice laced with venom. "What about Greg, Jeff, Chris? Were they sorry too? Or did they enjoy taking turns with you while I was passed out in the next room?" Sarah flinched at my words, her face contorting with shame. I don't know. I never wanted it to go that far." They what, Sarah?" I interrupted, my voice rising with anger. "They pressured you? They forced you? Because from where I was standing, it didn't look like you were putting up much of a fight." Her silence was all the answer I needed. I felt sick. My stomach churned with a toxic mix of rage and disgust, and I had to turn away from her before I did something I would regret. I stormed out of the living room, heading straight for the front door. I needed air. I needed to get out of that house before it suffocated me. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my skin like a slap to the face. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing deeply, trying to calm the storm that was raging inside me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. Sarah, my co-workers, the laughter, the moans. It was all seared into my brain, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had torn my life apart. I leaned against the porch railing, staring out into the darkness. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making any sense. How had this happened? How had my life gone from perfect to shattered in the span of one night? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? I don't know how long I stood outside, staring into the void, but eventually, I heard the sound of the front door creaking open behind me. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, her arms wrapped around herself as though she was trying to shield herself from the weight of her own guilt. "I need you to understand," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen, Adam. I never wanted to hurt you." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into the palms of my hands. "Well, congratulations, Sarah, because you did. You destroyed me." She took a tentative step toward me, her eyes pleading. "I love you, Adam. I do. This thing with them, it wasn't about you. It was a mistake. A horrible mistake." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "A mistake? You call screwing 3 men behind my back 4 months a mistake?" Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. I couldn't stand the thought of her touching me, not after what she had done. "I don't know why I did it," she whispered. "I don't even recognize myself anymore." "Neither do I," said coldly. "The woman I married would never have done this." We stood there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavy between us. There was no coming back from this, no fixing what had been broken. Our marriage was over. Our life together was over. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice trembling. "What are you going to do?" I stared at her, my heart heavy with the realization that the woman I had loved, the woman I had built my life with, was no longer the person standing in front of me. She was a stranger, a liar, a cheat. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hollow. "I really don't know." And in that moment, I realized that the man I had been, the husband, the provider, the man who had loved Sarah with every fiber of his being, was gone too. All that was left was the shattered remains of the life we had built together, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The next few days were a blur. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I went to work like a robot, functioning only on autopilot while the weight of Sarah's betrayal sat like a brick in my gut. It had been 2 weeks since I discovered the truth, and no matter how much I wanted to escape it, I couldn't. I would wake up every morning hoping it had all been a nightmare, but reality greeted me like a punch to the face every time. I had moved into the guest bedroom. It wasn't much of a change, but the symbolic distance mattered. I couldn't bear to sleep next to her. I couldn't even look at her without feeling my stomach churn with a mix of anger and revulsion. Sarah tried talking to me, tried apologizing, but every time she opened her mouth, it just made things worse. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want her to tell me it didn't mean anything, because clearly, it had. It meant something to her. It had to. You don't just throw away your marriage for nothing. One night, as I sat alone in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Greg, one of the men who had slept with my wife. My blood boiled just seeing his name pop up on the screen, but I opened the message anyway. "Greg, hey man, can we talk?" I stared at the words, feeling a surge of anger so strong that I almost threw my phone across the room. Talk? What could he possibly have to say to me now? Was he looking for forgiveness? Some kind of understanding? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to tell him to go to hell, but instead, I just turned off my phone and threw it onto the bed. The next day at work was worse than usual. Every time I saw one of the guys, Greg, Jeff, or Chris, I felt a wave of nausea. I could hardly focus on my job. It was like being stuck in a prison of my own making. How was I supposed to work with these men, to see them every day, knowing what they had done? Finally, around lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out of the office and found Greg in the break room, sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. The sight of him, so calm, so casual, made my blood boil. I had spent the last 2 weeks in hell, and here he was, acting like nothing had happened. I slammed the door behind me, startling him. His eyes widened when he saw the look on my face. "Adam," he started, but I cut him off. "Don't," I snapped, my voice cold and sharp. "Don't say a damn word, Greg." He set his coffee down, standing up slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "I just wanted to talk. I know you're mad." "Mad?" I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Mad doesn't even begin to cover it, Greg. You slept with my wife. You and the other guys, my coworkers, my so-called friends, took turns with her while I was passed out in the next room. And you think I'm just mad?" He looked genuinely uncomfortable, which, under different circumstances, might have been satisfying. But right now, I didn't care about his feelings. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Greg said, his voice pleading. "None of us did." I took a step closer, glaring at him with a fury I hadn't even known I was capable of. "You didn't mean for it to happen? Are you kidding me right now? You expect me to believe that? He swallowed hard, clearly realizing that there was no way out of this conversation. Look, Adam, I'm sorry. We all are. It was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. Mistake, I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To my marriage? You've destroyed my life, Greg. You, Jeff, Chris, all of you. I know, he said, his voice small. I know we messed up, but it's not like we set out to hurt you. It just happened. I stared at him in disbelief. How could he be so casual about this? How could he act like this was just some random, unintentional slip-up? You know what the worst part is? I said, my voice low and dangerous. It's not even that you guys slept with Sarah. It's that you thought so little of me, of our friendship, that you didn't even care about what it would do to me. Greg looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. I'm sorry, man. I really am. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my anger. There was no point in punching him, no point in making a scene here at work. It wouldn't change anything. But that didn't mean I was going to forgive him. Not by a long shot. Stay away from me, I said, my voice cold and hard. And tell the others the same. We're done. I turned on my heel and walked out of the break room, leaving Greg standing there, looking as guilty as he damn well should. As I made my way back to my office, my heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I had said my piece, but it didn't make me feel any better. It didn't erase what had happened, and it certainly didn't fix my shattered marriage. But it was a start. That evening, I came home to find Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She had been like this ever since the truth came out, quiet, remorseful, always on the verge of tears. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, to comfort her like I used to, but I couldn't, not after what she had done. Adam, she said softly as I walked through the door. I didn't respond. I walked past her, heading for the guest room, but she stood up, blocking my path. Please, we need to talk, she pleaded, her voice shaking. I can't stand this anymore. We need to figure out what we're going to do. I stared at her, feeling a fresh wave of anger rising up in my chest. Figure out what we're going to do? I repeated. What is there to figure out, Sarah? You cheated on me, with my coworkers, in our own house. There's nothing to figure out. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head desperately. No, it's not that simple. I made a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake, I snapped. You don't accidentally sleep with 3 different men. You made a choice, Sarah, a choice to betray me. She flinched at my words, her face crumpling with guilt. I know I messed up, but I love you, Adam. I still love you. I laughed, though it was more out of disbelief than anything else. Love me? You have a funny way of showing it. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. I couldn't stand the thought of her touching me. Not now. Not ever again. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll cut off all contact with them. Just, please don't give up on us. I stared at her, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could somehow salvage our marriage, but the other part of me, the part that had been shattered by her betrayal, knew that it was too late. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said quietly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Tears streamed down her face, and she shook her head. I'll prove it to you. I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me a chance. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that there was a way to fix this, to go back to the way things were before. But deep down, I knew that was impossible. The damage had been done, and no amount of therapy or apologies could change that. I need time, I said, my voice hollow. I don't know what I want right now. She nodded, her eyes filled with a desperate hope. Take all the time you need. Just, please don't leave me. I didn't respond. I turned and walked into the guest room, closing the door behind me. As I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake. Was I giving up too easily? Was there a way to save our marriage, or was I just prolonging the inevitable? But as the images of that night, the laughter, the moans, the sight of Sarah bent over in front of those men, flashed through my mind, I knew the answer. Some things just couldn't be forgiven. The days blurred into weeks, and I found myself sinking deeper and deeper into a pit of despair. I couldn't concentrate at work. I couldn't focus on anything but the betrayal, the lies, the disgust that now tainted every memory of my marriage. Sarah had moved out of our bedroom entirely, choosing instead to sleep on the couch. Every night, I could hear her soft sobs through the walls, but I didn't go to her. I couldn't. The thought of being close to her, of pretending everything was okay, made my skin crawl. I started drinking more. Not enough to black out, but enough to dull the edges of the pain. Enough to make it through the night without thinking about Sarah, about Greg, Jeff, and Chris, about everything I had lost. A month had passed since my life had shattered in front of me, and everything still felt like it was unraveling. Sarah's apologies, her desperate attempts to fix what she had destroyed, became background noise. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do that could make me forget the scene that replayed in my mind every single night. I didn't know how to move forward, hell, I didn't even know if I wanted to. But I knew one thing for certain: I needed to get out. I needed to escape from the endless cycle of anger and despair that had become my life. I started spending more time away from home. At first, I just took long drives, going nowhere in particular but relishing the feeling of being away from the house, away from the place where everything had fallen apart. I drove 4 hours, just me and the road, trying to outrun the thoughts that haunted me. It didn't work. No matter how far I drove, I couldn't escape the reality that awaited me back at home. I couldn't escape Sarah's tear-streaked face, her whispered apologies, her desperate pleas for forgiveness. I couldn't escape the betrayal that clung to me like a shadow, following me wherever I went. But one night, as I sat at a bar nursing a drink, something shifted. I looked around at the people laughing, talking, living their lives, and I realized something: I didn't have to stay trapped in this hell. I didn't have to keep punishing myself, keep drowning in the wreckage of my marriage. I could leave. The idea seemed so simple, so obvious, and yet it hit me like a bolt of lightning. I could walk away from all of this. From Sarah, from the house, from the memories. I could start over, build a new life somewhere far away from the people who had betrayed me. I had savings, enough to rent an apartment, maybe even buy a small house somewhere outside of the city. I could pack up my things, leave Sarah a note, and disappear. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be better than this, better than living in the ruins of a life that no longer made sense. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that leaving wasn't just an option, it was the only option. Staying here, trying to fix something that was beyond repair, was slowly killing me, and I couldn't let it. I wouldn't let it. That night, I made up my mind. I was going to leave, and I was never coming back. In the days that followed, I quietly began preparing for my escape. I withdrew money from our joint account, careful not to take too much at once so Sarah wouldn't notice. I packed up my most important belongings, the things that couldn't be replaced, into a suitcase and stashed it in the trunk of my car. I researched small towns a few hours away where I could disappear, where no one knew me and no one cared about my past. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't tell anyone. This was my plan, my escape, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone stop me. Sarah, oblivious to my intentions, continued her attempts to mend our broken marriage. She talked about counseling, about going away together to reconnect. But every word that came out of her mouth only solidified my decision. There was no reconnecting. There was no fixing this. Our marriage was dead, and I wasn't going to waste any more time pretending otherwise. On the night I planned to leave, Sarah was out. She had gone to visit her parents, probably to cry and vent about how terrible things had become between us. It didn't matter. By the time she came back, I would be long gone. I left a note on the kitchen table, simple and to the point. Sarah, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving, and I won't be coming back. I need to move on, and I hope one day you'll understand. I wish you the best, but I can't be a part of this life anymore. Adam. With one last glance around the house that had once been my home, I walked out the door, my suitcase in hand. The night was cold and quiet, the air heavy with the weight of finality. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, but above all, I felt free. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. The town I chose was small and unassuming, a far cry from the bustling city I had left behind. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business, where I could blend in without anyone asking questions. It was perfect. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, nothing fancy but enough to get by. The first few weeks were surreal. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in years. No Sarah, no coworkers, no reminders of the life I had once had. It was just me, a few boxes of my belongings, and the quiet. And I liked it. I got a job at a local hardware store, something simple that didn't require much thought or emotional investment. The work was monotonous, but that was exactly what I needed. I wanted to keep my mind busy, to keep the memories of the past at bay. But as much as I tried to move on, to start fresh, the past had a way of creeping back in. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when I would lie awake 4 hours, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events of that night in my mind. The laughter, the moans, the betrayal, it was all still there, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting for a moment of weakness to resurface. I tried not to dwell on it, but it was impossible to forget completely. I had been hurt in ways I didn't know were possible, and the scars ran deep, but I was determined not to let it define me. I had escaped, and that was the first step. It had been a few months since I left when I received the call. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at the hardware store, stocking shelves, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be a spam call or something equally unimportant, but it wasn't. It was Sarah. I stared at the phone, my heart racing. Why was she calling me? What could she possibly want after all this time? Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail and pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part of me, the part that was still curious, still hurt, couldn't resist. I stepped into the back room, away from prying eyes, and answered the call. Hello? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she had hung up. But then, I heard her voice, soft, broken. Adam? My heart clenched at the sound of her voice, so familiar yet so distant. What do you want, Sarah? I need to talk to you, she said, her voice trembling. Please. I leaned against the wall, trying to keep my emotions in check. Talk about what? There's nothing left to say. I know, she said quickly. I know you're done with me, and I don't blame you. But, something's happened. I need to tell you. My chest tightened with unease. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? Fine, I said, my voice cold. Talk. There was a pause, and I could hear her struggling to find the words. I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a freight train, knocking the breath from my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think. Pregnant? How? When? And then it hit me. I could barely force the words out. Is it mine? There was a long, painful silence on the other end of the line. No, she whispered. Everything inside me froze. It wasn't mine. Of course it wasn't mine. After everything that had happened, after the betrayal, after the lies, of course it wasn't mine. The room seemed to spin around me, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. I had no words, no response to this bombshell she had just dropped on me. What was there to say? What was there to do? I'm sorry, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you any more than I already have. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. Why are you telling me this now? What do you want from me? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I didn't know who else to turn to. I'm scared, Adam. I don't know what to do. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then the anger, the betrayal, the pain, all of it came rushing back, and any sympathy I might have felt evaporated. I don't care what you do, I said coldly. This isn't my problem anymore. You made your choices, Sarah. Now you have to live with them. She sobbed softly on the other end of the line, but I didn't care. I couldn't care. Not after everything she had put me through. Goodbye, Sarah, I said, and before she could say anything else, I hung up. After that phone call, I knew there was no going back. Any lingering hope, any small part of me that had still cared for Sarah, was gone. I was free, truly free, from her and the life we had once shared. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my new life. I made friends in the small town, found hobbies to keep me busy, and slowly but surely, I began to heal. The scars were still there, but they were fading, little by little. Sarah never called again.